don't have to. You can go that way.
Oh, okay.
Hey, it's our first time trying this, so we're going live, and we're going to be talking about mid-season blues and burnout. So we're going to see how this goes because we've never gone live,
No, we have not.
not on YouTube. So here we go. All right. Today on our show, we're talking about something crucial but often overlooked in volleyball, recognizing the signs of mid-season burnout in both athletes and coaches. So I got Shelby Chapa and Kelsi Luckenbacher. Dang it. It's not Kelsi Luckenbacher.
Oh, I didn't even realize you said that.
Already messed
Hey,
up.
welcome to our live show.
Was
It's all
like,
good.
That's funny.
Take two.
I didn't even recognize, so I would have never
You,
known.
you would have never known until
No.
your mom would have told you. You
Probably.
said your name wrong. All right. Let's try this again. All right. Today on the show, we're talking about something crucial but often overlooked in volleyball, recognizing the signs of mid-season burnout in both athletes and coaches. I have coaches, or two of our coaches, Shelby Chapa and Kelsi Luckenbach, and we're going to explore what to watch for and how to identify signs that really matter to athletes and you as a coach. And so I'm Jason Curlee, and welcome to the Rotation Station. This is the official podcast of Storm Performance Volleyball in Corpus Christi, Texas. So let's get into this. So we're talking about burnout.
burnout. Yeah.
Burnout, and it is really easy to happen and really easy to fall into, whether you're an athlete or a coach.
For sure. For sure.
And it typically happens kind of mid-season blues is what we call it.
Yeah, I think it happens like, you start off really strong and just kind of like it kind of happens like if you think of like if you have a career outside of coaching or you start the season, you're super like hyped and excited and it's all fresh and new and then a few weeks or a month or so into it, you just kind of get in that like lull, like what am
Right.
I doing? I'm just kind of feel like I'm going through the motions and um it's like you're here but you're not here. So yeah, I think it's a tough spot to be in and it's a tough spot to kind of like I think the first thing is recognizing that you're there and then just really trying to get creative to pull yourself out of it.
Right. And as a coach, it's really crucial because sometimes you're the one that has to recognize in you,
Mhm.
and you're also the one that has to recognize in your athletes.
Yeah.
So, and being able to recognize in you is really an important thing.
Yeah, I think that's the first part, especially like if you're really if you're in charge of this group of young athletes, if you get to a point where you recognize it in them, it's probably because at some point they probably recognize it in you also. Like you're disengaged you're disengaged in your coaching. You're not there. You're here, but you're kind of checked out.
Right.
Your excitement level decreases. All the fun things that you started doing at the beginning of practice have stopped.
Yep.
So and I think it's like I said, you've got to recognize it. If you feel like your team is feeling that and you see it in your athletes, you've got to kind of self-reflect and say, like, what am I doing as a coach? Am I contributing to this? And if I am, how do I get out of it? And then how do I get them out of it?
Right. So we're going to go through a couple of kind of recognition things you can recognize as a coach and some of the signs of burnout. And I think you said it best. It's always easy at the beginning. Everybody's excited
Mhm.
and the beginning of the season, and you have these great hopes and you have these great ideas and how it's going to go. And 2 months later, 3 months later, however long it is, especially like us, we have
Mhm.
quite a long season. We go from roughly about November,
Yeah.
all the way to May, sometimes June and July. And then a lot of our athletes train year round.
Yeah.
So,
And then even some of our coaches, you're coaching year round. So it gets to be the monotony starts to happen and you've got to again, try and pull yourself through and out of it.
right. And so a couple of signs that, as a coach, I think one of the first signs is your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Are you feeling the same enthusiasm that you did at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, and I think it's again, I feel like when it's bright and shiny and new, and you're at that start, it's easy to be enthusiastic and have all the fun. You haven't gone to your first tournament, so there's still those hopes of having a team that's at a certain level, like you have expectations as a coach, and you want your team to do all these things and accomplish all these things, and they're maybe just not meeting those expectations.
Right.
So as you go through and you're kind of just like, okay, well, this isn't really what I expected. They're
Right.
not meeting those goals. They're not achieving these things. We're maybe not winning a lot of games, or we're not winning tournaments, and
Right.
that's the goal and the expectation. You've got to kind of self-reflect to get creative, because at the end of the day, like your team hasn't, and I talk about it a lot, like there's two different kinds of goals. You have team goals, and then club is also used as, obviously, a lot of athletes use it to prepare them for college, or to prepare them for their high school sports or their middle school sports, or
Right.
whatever that next level is for them. So then you have in part individual goals.
Right.
And then as a coach, you feel the same thing. Like, you obviously have these expectations for your team. In club, the biggest thing everybody wants to do is get a bid.
Right.
Like that is, the end all goal. And,
and then what do you do when you feel that's not there?
Attainable, or
Yes.
it's not there. And I think it doesn't take away from the success and the level of your team. Because at the end of the day, only a certain amount of people are given those bids and given an opportunity to achieve at that level, but it doesn't diminish the work and the goals that your athletes have. So it's kind of just trying to help them through those things, and yourself as a coach are like really kind of taking some self-reflection, like, okay, here were my goals at the start of the season. We're at this midpoint, and being just brutally honest with yourself, like, we may not achieve these goals.
Right.
Let's reassess. Let's create some more attainable goals, some goals that, that are more actionable, that are going to help you be excited. So when your kids, meet that, you get that excitement level.
Right.
Like, my team, this past tournament, we had gone with 2 tournaments in, and our wins were lower than our losses. And obviously we sat down and we talked and we said, guys, like, we want attainable goals that we can sit down and look at and say, not just, oh, I want to go win a tournament, because yeah, that's the goal.
Right.
Everybody wants to go win a tournament. But hey, how about we start with, we want more wins than losses. That's our goal this weekend.
Right.
Just having more wins than losses. And then, they met that, and it's exciting and it's fun, and they meet that goal. And so then it's like they've amped up, and as a coach, you're amped up. Okay, look, they met this small little goal. They achieved that. Like, let's work to do bigger goals and get there.
So in a sense, it's changing the enthusiasm kind of midseason. And I know we're going to talk a lot about, what to do if you're in these burnout signs next week. And, as a coach, one of the things that you have to recognize is when you're less vocal, when you're less enthusiastic, are you showing that same excitement? Because if you're not, it's easy for your athletes to get into that place. And then, when you stop trying to engage your team in those high level drills, when you're just, again, you're starting to go through the motions, that's when you can recognize for yourself you're in that sign. And I think that leads into the next point, which is fatigue. Are you coming in and just feeling more tired than usual? And as a teacher, it's easy, to get that way, especially when you get to February. And it's easy. 1 week after Christmas, you think, oh, I've had 2 weeks off, and it's like you're right back into, you're tired. And, that is one of the signs of fatigue, when you are, or burnout, when you have that fatigue.
For sure. And I think it's easy, like, especially as I think sometimes as a coach, you have to recognize, like, maybe you don't do this as a full-time career. Like, you coach club outside of whatever your career is, whether you're a teacher or you coach in a high school level, or you work a 9 to 5, regular job. It's easy to let whatever's going on in your day job per se, trickle over and burn you out in this job. And so I think you have to, the same way you have talks with your kids, and, as coaches, we all, have talks like, hey, you got to use this as your escape, your release. Like, you come to volleyball and you enjoy it. I think you have to have that self-reflection in yourself when you're feeling that tired feeling, like remembering, like, hey, these girls, I want them to show up and I want them to give their best. So I need to reciprocate that. Like, I need to show up and give my best for them also. And maybe it's just, finding ways to, brainstorm and decompartmentalize a little bit better, like using your drive to practice to just like clear your mind and get ready for what's to come.
Right.
Because it's really easy to take whatever happened in your regular life. Like, I teach, from 8 o'clock to 4:20, I pick up my 2 daughters. It's crazy getting here. And it's really easy to take whatever happens from the time I start my day to, I start practice at 7:30, and there's a lot of day that happens
Right.
between that time, and it's real easy to take that tiredness and that frustration out on your athletes.
Right.
And I think, Coach Kelsi will talk about how, the athletes and vice versa and like how to pull them out of that. And I think the same way that, you want your athletes to show up for you when they're feeling tired, because, at the end of the day, they go to school from,
Right. They
8
go to
o'clock
school
to
all day.
4:30, and they deal with
Homework.
all the different things. We have to come from that like perspective, like they're meeting me here, I need to meet them here. So I made this commitment, and I'm gonna just, sometimes like slap yourself in the face and get out of it. Like,
Right.
hey, like I've got to show up no matter how tired I am, because at the end of the day, everybody's tired.
Mhm.
So we just got to work to get out of it.
I think another thing that is a sign of burnout is when you have that little social kind of change with your players. When you, and this is trying to for us to recognize as
For sure.
as a coach, when you don't really want to talk to them, or you're not engaging with
Mhm.
them, or especially it gets when it's frustrated and you think, well, it's not going the way I want, so why?
Mhm.
And you're not giving that feedback that they
Mhm.
need.
And then you also have like you have to think about too, like you may be getting frustration from parents. So, you may, you're in that middle of the season, people may be upset about playing time or roles on teams, or, parents may be upset that your team isn't, being as successful as they thought it could be. So I think there's a lot of different parts, like you were saying, that kind of, go into, that engagement. And hey, you're disassociating because you're frustrated with the parents, and it
Right.
has nothing to do with the athletes. Maybe the athletes are, they're doing their job, but you're just getting complaint after complaint from parents. So it's really easy to take that frustration
Right.
that's happening, externally, on the athletes as well. And I think that's the engagement that you start to see like happening less. You're like, well, if this is what the parents think, then their
Right.
athletes probably think that,
Right.
and why am I even here? Why am I showing up? And nobody here likes me, or nobody here wants me here, or they don't think I'm doing my job as a coach.
Yeah. And that's one of the ways to spot that is, you're avoiding the
Mhm.
casual conversations,
Mhm.
with your athletes,
The
the
little things.
coming in and just, hey, how was your day? How was your school day? And
Mhm.
and doing things like that. And you're just kind of avoiding that,
Mhm.
those one-on-one
You may stop
moments when you
doing
check
the
in,
team bonding things,
team
and all
bonding.
of
Yep.
those things that you started in the beginning of season, and they're fresh and exciting, and you're doing all the fun things, and then you get to kind of this brick wall where you're like, okay, well,
Or if you work, whether it's at school and you have assistant coaches, or like with our club, you're just avoiding it. You're
For
just
sure.
coming in, you're doing your thing, and then you're gone.
For sure.
You're avoiding all of that kind of collaboration and communication. So
Yes. Yeah.
I think another area that is a sign of it is that performance inconsistency. If the performance is inconsistent, one time you're way up here, and then the next time you're
Mhm.
way down there, and it's just all over the place. That decision making, that strategic planning, that starts to fluctuate
For sure. And I
because
think,
you're not putting
yeah.
that time
Yeah.
into it.
And then you start to second guess yourself, after hearing all the negative, and maybe it's just negative internally. Like, it's not even anything, our human nature is to be really hard on ourselves. So I think it's, even as a coach, if you feel like your team isn't being successful, I know some at times in my coaching career have taken that personally. Like, hey, my team isn't achieving this. It's my fault.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you may have to just sit and really reflect, like, they're not meeting your expectations that you had preconceived. Like, sit and reflect and say, are these really, are your expectations really attainable?
Right.
And you may have just overshot what you thought your team could do, and that's okay. Like, you obviously want your team to excel and do all these things, but you may have to sit and reflect and say, hey, they they aren't there yet.
Right.
They'll get there. And I think that's really especially hard when you're at a level that maybe like, I think like I coach 14s, and that's a really pivotal age, I think, in the club world, is because it's these kids who are they're at the end of their middle school, they're going into high school, they haven't quite matured yet. So a lot of times, not that we don't see all this success, but you lay all these foundational building blocks. And it isn't until they're 15, 16,
Right, that you start to
17 that
really,
you really start to see
and it's hard to
all of
wait
these
that long.
things. And it is, and it's
Yeah.
really hard to, remember that you were a part of that success. And you're just like, you're not seeing the fruition of your labor like instantaneously. Like
Right.
they're not getting the bids when they were with me. They weren't winning the tournaments when they were with me. So I think it's again just making
Somebody
sure.
else is getting all the glory,
Yeah.
and I didn't,
And
and then
it's
that just
hard
drags
to
on.
be in that place. And I think that also leads into the performance inconsistency and being disengaged and kind of just all of the things. You kind of get to that point where you're like, well, is what I'm doing enough?
Right.
And I think you just have to really look back at your goals. And, you obviously set goals at the beginning of season, but self-reflect and reflect at the middle of the season when you start to feel this fatigue and this burnout and say, hey, let's reflect, let's look at these goals, let's see what we can do to better them and make them more attainable for the level that my team is at right now.
Right.
3 months into club season.
Yeah. And a couple other areas that, maybe signs, body language, your body language changes. If you kind of avoiding eye contact, you're slouching, you have less movement, you start to sit more often on the sideline instead of being really active. And that doesn't mean that every time you sit, you never should sit, but there's just those signs of that. And I think when you have that just decrease in communication and motivation,
for sure.
Those moments when you're disengaging from doing that. And it is a lot of it is trying to push through, having that lack of energy in your movements, having that lack of energy and just that excitement, when you're not feeling that excitement, you're kind of in that mid-season blues.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's really like, it just has to come to a point where you just power through. You give yourself a day, like, hey, what you get to this point where you're like, okay, this is not my best. I'm not bringing my best. Let me self-reflect. Let me set new goals. Let me do all these things and let's come into practice. Because if you're feeling it, your kids are feeling it, your parents are feeling it, your club director probably sees it, or if you're at a high school, your athletic director, whoever is, sees it. And it's, you have to get to that point where you take some initiative and say, hey, like, we're done with this. We're going to, get out of this funk and we're going to just create some new goals to make it exciting and fresh and fun again.
Yep. So try to recognize some of those things in you. And we're going to talk about a little bit about athletes, but it's important as a coach to begin to recognize the signs that you are in that funk, because if you are in that funk yourself, if you're feeling those blues, then most likely your athletes are feeling those blues as well. So we're with Coach Kelsi now, and we're going to talk about some of the signs to look at in your athletes.
Yeah. Hey, Jason. How are you?
I'm good. You ready to go?
Just chilling, living life, living the best life. So.
All right. So a lot of these are probably a lot of the same things that as if you can see them in yourself, you're going to probably see them in your athletes. And talking as athletes, it's something I honestly, as an athlete, I never faced. I can't remember ever a time of having a midseason blue.
Really? I can definitely remember sometimes of having a midseason blue, more so in college, I would say, rather than like high school, anything like that, club season, just because we traveled a lot. And so that was one of the hardest things. And in college was one of the times whenever, I guess you could say more, it was kind of more to like playing time and stuff. And I know that's kind of like not the best, but sometimes that does play a part in it. And so the travel on top of practicing all the time, classes all the time, and then sitting there and doing all this work and everything, it can end up weighing on you. And so,
and I can see that because as a football player, that's what I was. We normally just played on Saturdays. And so, we're not having to play twice a week. And so our season was kind of, you have 10, 11 games, 12 or 13 if you, as a Division II, you're in the playoffs. But, it was just a little bit different. You know, when you're traveling both and trying to do school and trying to do all of that, it can easily fall into it.
For sure. Especially because when we were playing, we would have Friday, Saturday games, and then you would have to drive all the, like, I remember the worst years were like my freshman and sophomore year because of how our conference was aligned, and we had to drive to New Mexico. And I just remember that was a time long ways. You have a Friday, Saturday, and then you have to drive back, and then immediately Sunday's your only rest day, and then you go back to school, go back to practicing, and then you could travel again the next week to West Texas. So that was one of the hardest things. And I think it came more with the travel of the actual burnout. And so that's why I say, like, I didn't really face it in high school. It was more of college when we were taking those long, drawn out trips because we didn't fly anywhere. We had to drive everywhere. So because of that, it made everything a little bit longer. And whenever you got to the game, you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna sleep and then I'm gonna play. But it didn't always feel like, oh, I'm ready to go because you sat on a bus for so long.
Right. And with the athletes that we deal with, a lot of these athletes, they'll go through their high school season or their middle school season.
Mhm.
They'll be starting in August. They're going all the way up through October,
Mhm.
and then hit October, get done with whatever it is, if it playoffs or regular season, then they're boom right into it with us. And so
Mhm.
you're going really August all the way till May.
Yeah.
If you make nationals, could be June and
Mhm.
July, and then you're right back into your
School
high school
season.
season. So
Yeah.
it's literally, there's no rest.
No. And then the craziness too with like the summer, a lot of kids, they don't take time off during the summer. They really don't because they see, like, even I as an athlete, I saw that as my time to prepare for my next season. So I had to be putting in just as much work as I was doing whenever I was in season at the
Right.
time. So that way I could keep my spot and be able to have the same goals, or not same goals, but like reach the goals that I want to for that season.
Right. So it is one thing that I think it's easy for volleyball players at some point in their career, especially in today's world
Mhm.
with the pressures and everything, to fall into a mid-season blues. So we're going to talk
Yeah.
about, again, some of the signs that you can look for in your athletes. I think the number one sign, just like we talked with coaches, is a change in enthusiasm level.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that I've seen is a change in enthusiasm level because think about it, they're not cheering as much. They're not coming. The one of the biggest ways that I've started to see it with my athletes is they're very disciplined and they know you have to be there at a specific time. And so whenever we're there, they like, let's say we go to a tournament and I have someone come in late and they don't say anything and they're just like, oh, kind of like moping through, like don't really have like a care in the world, I guess you could say, that they are running late and not like, oh, hey coach, I'm so sorry, like it is in the beginning of the season more so. And I think that goes to a part with the enthusiasm because they're mentally not checked in at that point and
Right.
not wanting to achieve more. And not that it's saying it's a bad thing, but they're in that moment of like, oh, I'm really tired. I had a long week at school, and that's
Right.
okay, but you have to figure out a way around it. Like me personally, one of the best ways that I do it as a coach is every single time I come to practice, I always listen to like my favorite songs to get me in like a serotonin. I give myself that serotonin so that way I'm like, okay, I'm having a happy energy. I'm rebooting myself to come to practice. And sometimes athletes need to do that too. Like
Right.
listen to your favorite songs or sit there and do something that makes you happy before you go to practice. So that way you're carrying that energy into your practice and not carrying like the negative energy from whatever happened at school with your friends, with anyone, teachers, anything like that. You're not carrying that energy with you. You have that moment of like a release and then you're like, okay, cool. Like I'm ready to start practice and be focused and checked in.
Right. And so as an athlete, I think, or as a coach, one of the ways you start to see those little signs is the athlete that came early
Mhm.
is now all of a sudden starting to come late. And it's not just once, if they're going to come late here and there, but when they start to that consistent,
Or even
being late, when they are running out,
Yeah.
as soon as whereas they used to kind of stay or hang
Hang
around a
out.
little bit,
Mhm.
right? And all of a sudden you have that kind of change in that with them.
One
So
of the other things I would say too would be like just not even wearing your right clothes. It's a mental thing. Like you know what you have to wear to practice.
true.
And so like if you know you're coming in the wrong spandex or the wrong shirt, like that's your lack of effort at that point, in my opinion, because it's the simple things that it comes down to at the end of the day. And that's one of the easiest ways that you can start to see people check out because you're like, okay, you know you need to wear this shirt. You
Right.
don't have any other shirts like that.
Right.
Why are you wearing this other one? Why do you think that's okay? Type deal.
Yep. So starting to, if your athlete is starting to lose that enthusiasm
Mhm.
that they had, especially if they're that high level, and you can really tell,
Yeah.
that's one of the signs. They're not bonding, they're not doing team bonding things. They're just kind of avoiding, they're just kind of moving on and just doing that. I think the next thing to look for is signs of unusual fatigue.
Mhm.
You're going to have athletes that have fatigue.
Yeah.
It's a long season.
Mhm.
It's a long year, so to speak. But it's when there's this unusual that goes beyond normal tiredness,
Mhm.
where athletes, are just really drained.
Yeah. See, so I've actually already experienced that with some of my athletes. Like some of them I've had to do check-ins because I'll notice at practice one day, I'm like, okay, you're completely not yourself. You're trying and I can see you're trying, but everything about your demeanor, how you're playing, your consistency level, it's entirely different. And just that little check-in as a coach, being able to be like, "Hey, what's going on?" Sometimes that can change everything around because then they realize you as an athlete, you always wanna make sure your coaches are bought into you.
Right.
You wanna make sure that they care about you. That's how
Right.
you buy into them. And so, like, kind of from the coach's perspective, checking in on them. And then as an athlete, being one of the ones that has that happen, it really you just have to figure out like, one of the things that we've kind of faced a little bit of midseason blues and my team, what they're doing is they're telling me about their why. Why do you play? Because in times like this, you can feel like, oh, well, maybe I don't want to play in college. Maybe I don't want to play at all. Maybe I don't want to do club. Like it can feel like a lot. So that's why we're doing that right now. So that way they can remember at the end of the day, like, this is why I love this.
Right.
This is why I am doing this. And sometimes just those little check ins as an athlete, like you can always ask yourself, oh, why do I play volleyball? Why? And I have said this multiple times on our podcast, but I think journaling is so important. As an athlete, you have to journal. You have to like put those thoughts out so it's not just internalized and you're able to actually push where you need to.
Right.
And then it's easier to move forward from there.
Yeah. So probably the next thing that you can see is that difference, and I think you said a little bit of that when they're not as engaged
Mhm.
in practice, when they're a little off.
Yeah.
And again, I think it is, in recognizing you have to know your team,
Mhm.
you have to know your players, and it's not a matter of you as the coach just showing up. But you get to know them, their rhythms,
Mhm.
their enthusiasm level, their energy level, and because one of the reasons you want to recognize these is so you can help them go through this.
Yeah.
And so when you start to see a little bit difference in that certain athlete's engagement in
Mhm.
practice, it's a little bit down. And again, it's not just a one-time thing.
Mhm.
It's when you start to see the patterns.
Yeah.
It's happening. You know, practice after practice or tournament after tournament, game
Mhm.
after game, you're starting to see that engagement a little bit lower. So making sure that you can spot that, as maybe when they're participating less in a drill,
Mhm.
they're hiding.
Yeah. Or even like, I know this sounds so crazy, but the people that were always your go-tos of like, "Hey, we have to Shag, I need you to go get this." Like, that's an easy recognition. If you have your so athletes that are doing it are always like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll go." And then you have your ones that are kinda just like, you get to midseason and no one wants to help. And it's like, no,
Right.
no, no. We gotta all do it. We gotta all be in it together as a team. And that's
Yep.
just one way as a coach to be able to see that. So as an athlete, always make sure that you are going above and beyond in those areas because those are the simple things. That requires no skill from volleyball. That requires no external effort that's like super exhausting. It's just staying checked in and being like, okay, yeah, I got to do this because I got to help my team. Like, we
Yeah.
can't do anything if we don't have balls or we don't have our equipment that we need. And so that's one way as an athlete, like you stay mentally checked in.
Right.
And I think one thing too is like sometimes when we get into the middle of season, athletes don't realize we have practice plans dedicated to making them better, right?
Right.
And so when they're going into practice, they're like, "Oh, well, why am I not doing anything? Or why am I not doing this?" And it's not necessarily that they don't need work, but at the moment, the team needs more work on servicing. We can't do nothing if we can't pass the ball.
Right.
So, yeah, as a hitter, it might be a little bit like, oh, well, this is frustrating because I'm not really doing anything.
Because you want to do the things you want to do.
Exactly. And so, as an athlete, you have to sit back and recognize, like, okay, one, I'm going to be engaged by helping my teammates, talking to them, being very loud, very communicative. And then also to learning. You can always learn when you're on the sideline. And I think that's one thing a lot of kids do. And that's one thing I would have wish I would have done sooner was as an athlete, pay attention to my coach and what she's saying more to everyone around, not just what she says to me, because you can learn so much and then coach doesn't have to repeat themselves.
Right.
So you're constantly growing, constantly evolving your game at that point.
So another sign that athletes may be going through, and we can hit a couple in one thing is social changes with
Mhm.
teammates. Especially if you're a high school coach, you tend to see these a little bit
Mhm.
more because if you're at your school, you tend to see your athletes a little bit more than say we do.
Yeah.
But when you have the social changes, when an athlete's not participating in team outings or
Mhm.
team, bonding things, or like what a lot of times we're doing is having our athletes come in a little early and
Yeah.
just kind of bond, and that same teammate is not doing that, they may start to isolate themselves.
Mhm.
So if you're seeing that, or they're once that outgoing,
Yeah.
that friendly, they're everybody's friend, and all
Mhm.
of a sudden they're almost like nobody's friend.
Yeah.
That's something to recognize in social changes with players. And then going in a little bit backwards into this, performance inconsistency.
Mhm.
If their performance is starting to get real inconsistent,
Mhm.
and a lot of times that's a mental thing.
Yeah.
And it's easy to fall into that burnout when things aren't going right for
Mhm.
you as an individual. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
No, yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest things that helped me as an athlete was at that point when I was feeling the burnout, feeling all of the I can't hit a ball in the court, I can't pass the ball to save my life, I can't do any of this, and I don't know why this is happening to me. A lot of times it's because we want it so bad and we're overthinking every little thing.
Right.
So, one of the things that I tell my athletes whenever we face this in a game, and it's like, oh, I can just tell we're having a moment and nothing's really working out for us, or they're having a good serve and we can't get out of it. Focus on the little things.
Right.
Overemphasize the little things because that's something you can control.
Right.
And as an athlete, whenever you focus on that, then everything else becomes like a silent noise because you don't have to worry about, oh, well, am I going to get this kill?
Right.
Or am I going to get this pass? Or are they going to come at me again? Like, okay, yeah, it's a little bit of confidence too. Like, I've done this 10 out of 10 times at practice.
Right.
And so I have to trust my training, one, but also two, overemphasize little things. If I know in that moment my platform is really late and I'm shanking every ball, literally as soon as the server tosses it, make your platform, hold your angle. And it's something as simple as that that can change everything in your game, especially when you feel those burnouts. Because a lot of times as athletes, we don't think about it like, oh, I'm feeling a burnout, but I'm still doing the same thing that I was before,
Right.
whenever I was having a high intensity, high energy, all this other things. You're not, though.
Right.
You're not doing that as an athlete. So because of that, you have to overemphasize the little things, overemphasize feet to the ball,
Right.
whether you're a setter or focus on your contact point as a setter. Because what I've noticed is a lot of times as we get into season, we start to become lazy with those little habits. And that's one of the biggest issues is you get into those lazy habits and then it starts to transform some of your game. And then you're like, oh, well, it's midseason. I'm having these issues. I'm having all this happen. And it's like, no, just go back to the basics. Simplify it all.
Right.
Because then you'll be able to focus on your form, things like that. And you'll see a way faster outcome than you would doing anything else and changing it.
Right. And probably the biggest one, and this comes with other things as well. So a lot of these signs will come in several things. It won't just be one.
Mhm.
But probably the biggest sign that an athlete is in that midseason blues is their body language.
Yeah.
And that's going to come the body language with the performance inconsistency, with the enthusiasm level.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden it comes in their body language. And,
Yeah.
and again, I keep saying you got to recognize this. You have to see and know your athletes.
Mhm.
And know those body language signals, because physical burnout and emotional detachment, when you start to have those things, it shows in your body language.
Yeah.
You don't carry yourself with that,
Mhm.
shoulders back, chin up kind of motion, you're just kind of
Sulking in it all. Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that athletes across the board need to do better at is just a self-realization. What are you doing right now? Am I actually doing what I need to produce for the team?
right.
Am I actually going out there giving it 110%? Because a lot of times it's hard because we think that when we're in this moment, everyone's attacking you and coming at you because you're already feeling down. You're
Right.
really already feeling this way. So whenever a coach starts to get mad, you're like, oh, well, she's just targeting me. She just wants to come at me. And it's like, as an athlete, no, like she wants the better for me. So because of that, I have to take that and just run forward with it.
Right.
And then also too, realizing after a practice, okay, that wasn't my best. I could have done better in a lot of different areas. Watching film is one of the best ways to get better at that because sometimes you may be doing something and you don't realize it until you actually see it. Once you see it, then you're like, oh, okay, coach was right. I wasn't getting my feet to the ball and I was frustrated with her, when in reality it was me the entire time.
Right.
And so I think that self-realization, you're able to grow as an athlete faster, and you're able to push yourself to do more for what you need
Right.
and to be better for the team overall.
So learning to, as a coach, to read that body language, the rolling eyes, the arms crossed, the you know, those moments, and chain those into performance and all the other different signs. But again, because they're going to come in multiples, you know, but the body language is going to be the biggest sign language if you're trying to recognize this in your athletes. That's the key, you know, because one of the things we want to be able to do is recognize it in our athletes so that we can then start to help them. And if you can't recognize it, you know, you're not going to be able to help them.
Yeah.
So again, you know, as we wrap this up, you know, early recognition is crucial. Seeing it not only, especially in yourself, because most likely if it's happening in you, it's going to leak to your athletes.
Yeah.
And so learning to recognize early is crucial because it's going to prevent long-term damage. And we've seen that, you know, when you have as many teams as we have, you know, it's easy to see some teams, you know, crumble mid-season and they never recover. And some are able to push through that. So, you know, if you can recognize it early, you can prevent that long-term damage.
Yeah. And I think also too, sometimes like on both ends, coaches, athletes, we do this at the end of the day because we love it and we have so much fun doing it. So make it fun. Like you only, in my opinion, this is one thing I've lived by here in the last like few years. You only have one life. You can't do nothing if you're sulking in it constantly. Like that's what you're going to remember about your life. So as an athlete, you don't want to look back if you don't go and play college or you don't go and play pro. You don't want to look back and have that feeling. You don't want to have that regret. And of course, there's going to be regret in life. But at the end of the day, there's a lot more things that we can control than what we actually think. And especially being a younger athlete, we don't always are able to recognize that. And coaches, we have a big role in that. So I think having that, and then also too, making sure like go out there and have fun. That's what you do this for at the end of the day. That is the reason and everything. So make it fun, make it enjoyable for you and your athletes if you're a coach, and just go have fun.
Right. And going back, you know, that early recognition is just for that, so that you can maintain that motivation.
Yeah.
You can keep your morale up. You know, the sooner you can tackle this, you can get back out of it.
Yeah.
You know, the longer you stay in it, the harder it is to dig out. And then also recognizing it early helps to build trust with you and your team, with your players. And that's why it's all important. You know, recognizing this is the key to be able to get out of it. And that's what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to get out of it. You know, and there are lots of little tricks and stuff, and we're going to go next week deeper into how to, you know, get out of this situation. But you know, it's the ability to recognize it first. If you can't recognize it, and you can't get out of it.
Nope, you can't do nothing without self-recognition. So
yep. And so watch for enthusiasm drops, watch for fatigue, unusual fatigue, that engagement decline, that social withdrawal. If your athlete is socially withdrawing, the inconsistency in performance, and then body language. And if you can start to see multiples of those signs, you're going to start to see burnout, and also within yourself. And I think it's important with you as a coach to always stay mentally strong, because if you're not mentally strong, your athletes aren't going to be mentally strong.
Yeah, 100%.
So again, recognizing all that is important. And that's it for our podcast this week. We want to just thank you for listening to the Rotation Station. This is the official podcast of Storm Performance Volleyball in Corpus Christi, Texas. And you can learn more about us at ccstormvolleyball.com, or you can search for us online at any of our social networks, Storm Performance Volleyball, to see us. Until then, we'll be back next week with more tips, more insights, and strategies to help you perform. And until then, remember, every day is an opportunity for you to get better. End.
I wish I would have